You've written best-selling books, created courses that have helped thousands, you've spoken internationally, run your own developmental clinic, and you've been interviewed on more podcasts, radio shows, and TV segments than we can count. But most people don't know where it all started. Before this, you spent years working alongside child protection. Do you think that work shaped your understanding of what families really need?
The most extraordinary thing happened when I was doing that work, and that was even in the midst of observing parents, uh, arguably at their worst, doing things to children that really should never be done to anyone. It occurred to me that everybody everywhere is doing the best that they can, given the circumstances that they find themselves in and given those from which they have come. And well, I don't say that to excuse any of that kind of treatment of children. I say that to punctuate this shift that began to occur, which I think is largely how it is that I am where I am today. And the shift was in understanding that when parents are able to grow themselves, they are able to show up for their children
Mm,
in ways that go so far beyond what anybody could imagine,
mm.
like in the best possible way. And I think that's sort of how this all began. And back then I thought, oh, the answer is, to work with the children and do some check-ins with the parents to help them sort of come along. But the more that I watched all of that play out and I sort of had this front row seat to life for these families that were, so affected by their own story and
Mm.
the story of their parents and the story of their parents' parents, I really came to internalize in ways that wouldn't have otherwise been possible the importance of really taking a wider angle and coming in alongside parents so that families can be okay. And as part of that, children can be okay.
So that's why you created the Parent Transformation Journey?
Yeah, the idea was that, like you can send your kid to me or any therapist for an hour a week, and really it's an expensive play date in most cases. But if we can get access to parents, the idea about raising children in the best possible way is to create an environment that is conducive to growth.
Right.
Who's in charge of the environment? And for most children, it's their parents that are setting the tone. It's the parents that create the environment of the family home, and also parents that as an extension of that, are creating the environment that becomes the child's world, their life. So if we want to affect real change for children, like we don't do that an hour a week in the therapist's office.
Right.
We do that when we get very serious about coming back to the truth of who we are and aligning the way that we move through life with that truth.
Was there a moment that made you know that this was needed?
You know that, yes, and the moment actually doesn't come from my clinical work. The moment actually comes from my personal
Right.
life and
Right.
work. It's that I had read all the books, wrote a couple of them. I had done the degree, 13 years worth of post-secondary education.
Right.
And I had, at that point been practicing for a few years, and I had become a parent. And I would wake up in the morning with a certain idea of how I was going to show up for my kids that day and what it was going to look like and how I was going to respond to this issue and how I was going to discipline when that happened, et cetera, et cetera. And then I would hear out my mouth all the things that I didn't want to be saying
Right.
and all of the reactivity that I didn't want to be experiencing that. And I realized that there was such a disconnect between sort of here and here. And I began to imagine what it would be like for those things to come together, for the the head to speak the language of the heart
Mm.
rather than to be so reactive and at the effect of the moment. It would take me many, many more years, a failed marriage, and several other kinds of life's challenges before I would really get serious about getting to work on myself. And along the way, became increasingly clear that the answer is in helping parents solve the puzzle that is life for them And if we can do that, then they get to show up for their children,
Right.
and then those children get a chance, right?
So that's why you work with the parents instead of the children. This is a big shift for a lot of people to
Mm.
realize that helping the parent helps the child.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are very committed to this idea of providing direct service to children. And to be sure, I do think that there are some cases where that is appropriate when trauma has become stuck and it is not moving through for the child. And in those cases, I think that some of the expressive therapies can be a brilliant pathway through that for the child. And in most cases, uh, I believe that the time, the energy, the investment on all levels is best done with the parent, who will then shape the world around the child.
Cool. Cool. You often say nothing comes from the outside of you that doesn't already exist inside of you. Can you explain what that really means when it comes to parenting?
Yeah. So we onboard programs, narratives, ideas about self in the world. We're doing that from the moment we arrive in the world. And in fact, even probably before we've actually been born into the world. And when we have all of that going on, we grow up and we become people whose minds have been shaped
Mm.
by our experiences and those of our ancestral line. And because of that, you don't look out at the world through lenses that are clear. You look out at the world through lenses that have become colored by your history, by those narratives, by those programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, somebody could be looking at me right now and being like, oh, that pink, like, really, is that appropriate? But that's through your lens.
Right.
That's a perception that you have. Somebody else might look at that pink and be like, yes, show up that way, do that. That's all perception. And so that's a very surface level example. But now imagine your child speaks to you a certain way,
Right.
or you're having a disagreement with your parenting partner about how to discipline, and you got lenses on in terms of how you're experiencing all of
Right.
that as well. And depending on what your lens is colored by, or the flavor of that perception, I mean, that can lead to all sorts of misery and conflict and difficulty that, frankly, is unnecessary.
Right.
And so I always think, you know, all of it's a story. Like, we're making it all up through the lenses that we look at our lives with. And so if all of it's a story and you're making it all up anyways, you might as well tell a story to yourself that feels good and maybe has a slightly different, perhaps happier ending.
Cool. You talked about this before, how you did all the reading, how you did all the learning, 13 years of education. So many parents are trying to do it right. And they're trying to do the reading, they're trying to do all the learning,
Mhm.
and they're trying to show up, but they still feel like something's off. Why?
I think for most parents, it's because they are crowdsourcing
Mm.
how to parent. They're trying to figure it out rather than figure it in. And there's only so much you can do in terms of like sticking a band aid on it. You really do have to get down to the business of sorting out, like, what on the inside of me
Mm.
is creating this experience. And you can read all the books and do all of the things and still find that it's not quite there, which is why this work, the parent transformation journey work, doesn't stop at just a simple understanding of child development. It doesn't stop at a simple understanding of the importance of relationship and the whole concept of attachment as a driving life force that every single human needs.
Mhm.
It it takes those two significant pieces and blends them in with this idea of consciousness, that we all have programs that are subterranean, maybe in nature. And it's those programs that are actually running the show. We think it's our, big fabulous brain that read all the books. No, it's your programs that are actually running the show. And so if we want to change how the show looks, we got to do the deep dive into understanding the program so that we can bring a new understanding to the way it is that we are showing up in our lives.
So, what does the role of our inner child play in this understanding?
The role of the inner child, I understand that as we are all the ages that we have ever been. So inside of me, I have a 1-year-old, and I have a 2-year-old, and I have a 4-year-old, and I have a 14-year-old, and I have a 24-year-old. I'm all of the ages that I have ever been. Those don't cease to exist. That version of myself is still on the inside. We also know that roughly the first 6 years of life become the blueprint by which we will live the rest of our lives. And so when we're thinking about inner child work, really what we're doing is in the present moment becoming time travelers,
Mm,
where we can go back in time and reparent that little 2-year-old, that little 4-year-old, that 14-year-old, reparent them so that the program gets to shift, the
mm.
narrative gets to shift. And in time traveling that way, we bring alive the beautiful expression of John Bradshaw, who once said, "It's never too late to have a good childhood." And when you do inner child work, you get to give that to yourself. And what's so amazing is when you give that to the inner child, you become available to and able to give that to your outer child. And so that becomes the interplay for us as parents. Inner child work allows for outer child growth.
That's what you
That's my new
mean.
tagline. I feel like we need to
Mm.
mark that.
That's what you mean by doing your own work,
Mm.
growing yourself up so you can actually help grow up your child.
Yeah, yes, we need to grow ourselves in order to grow our children. The world is actually full of children walking around in the form of adult bodies. Just because you're, 39 doesn't mean you're actually a grown
Right.
up. And through nobody's fault, I witness a lot of parents who are parenting as children. And it's really tricky to try and raise a child when you're showing up as a child.
Right.
And so doing your own work allows you to show up as an adult, allows you to show up as a guide, allows you to show up as your
Mm.
child's North Star rather than being reactive and in the grind of it, just like a child would be.
This is pretty personal and powerful. Can you talk about what actually can you talk about what actually changes when someone does this work?
It is really personal and powerful. And the change when somebody does this kind of work, when they really commit to it and really dig in and really put the hours in, not just showing up
Right.
to a therapy session, but every day adjusting the way that they see the world and holding themselves fiercely and radically accountable to that process, what happens is you get to have a new story.
Right.
You get to feel like the path is not so full of challenge and there aren't so many speed bumps to get out of the way and all the other things. You get to feel like you're doing life with a set of lenses that allows you to know peace and that allows your children to be who it is that they actually are rather than pretzeling themselves to become what you think they should be.
Right.
And when that happens, like everybody gets to live the truth of who they are. And that's how we have, a happy life.
Right. So you've seen these transformations in people's homes, in their relationships, in their sense of self.
I watch people walk right out of their programs, right back into their hearts,
Nice.
and right back into what life is meant to be. It's an incredible thing to think about some of my clients who've come through the parent transformation journey, who started the journey, first session, I want to know how to get divorced and how to do that without messing my kids up, who now have a thriving family life
Mm.
and a wonderful connected relationship with their parenting partner, whose children are benefiting from the kind of energy and environment that that creates for them in the home. I've watched parents who go from being, run ragged and really full of a lot of grindiness about their parenting experience. It's so hard. Kids are so much work.
Mhm.
They're so depleting. Why do they always, like that kind of energy? And you watch them come through that and actually land back inside themselves and let go of that narrative so that they get to enjoy their
Right.
children and enjoy the life that they're living with their children. It's an incredible thing to watch parents kind of rebirth themselves
Mm.
and show up in their lives in ways that allow for peace and joy and all the things.
So you're not just teaching people how to parent, you're teaching people how to think differently, how to feel differently,
Mhm.
how to respond rather than react. You spoke a little bit about this, but can you dive more deeply into how development, attachment, and consciousness all weave together in this work?
Yeah, what's interesting is I actually can't teach someone how to parent.
Right.
I have this
But you've
this
written books.
yes, and I still can't teach you how to parent because it's not about what you do, rather it's about how you be. The doing, the action, the words that you choose, the discipline strategy that you use, whatever it is in the moment, all of that doing actually comes from your being.
Mm.
And so if you haven't sorted out the being part of you, you're really going to be challenged in the doing part. I can tell you a million different ways till I'm blue in the face. How to speak to your child, what words to use when this is happening, what to do when that's happening. And all of it will fall flat if it doesn't come from inside of you. Like this being, this life force that comes out your mouth and shows up in the way that you act and interact with the people around you. I cannot teach you how to be with your children and be with yourselves. And so the idea of pulling from the child development literature, so we know who children are and we can make sense of them and we cannot take so personally all of their behaviors and everything else, pulling from the field of attachment and attachment theory so that we really get that our foundational reason for existing actually comes down to connection.
Mhm.
And when we can make sense of that, insofar as it applies to child raising, that changes everything. So, development, relationship, attachment, connection, and then consciousness. Who am I?
Mm.
Why am I the way that I am?
Mm.
What are the programs that live beneath the surface and run my life without me even knowing that that's happening?
Right.
And when we can really get real about like we're never upset for the reasons that we think, we are upset for reasons that probably hark back to when we were 4 years old and how somebody responded to us then, or when we were 1 year old and how someone responded to us then. When we can make sense of where all of those programs and that whole story comes from, then we get to shift it.
Right.
We get to bring all that together and really change life for ourselves and for our children.
So you say until we learn what's driving the pattern, we'll keep on repeating it. If we don't make sense of these things, if we don't understand our own lenses and who am I, then we're just going to keep on repeating again and again, expecting a different result or getting upset with our kids for not themselves figuring out why we're okay. So why is it so important that people look inside themselves instead of just trying to change what's happening on the surface?
You will spend your whole life depleting your energy and your coping reserves if you just keep trying to change everything out here, because ultimately it's not going to work. If that worked, then we could throw some money at something and magically it would get better. If that worked, then we could just shift some kind of dynamic in our external world and all of a sudden we would feel better. And what most of us as adults know is that we tried that. We tried it in 100 different ways, and none of it landed. It didn't work. Nothing stuck because that's not what it is to actually be a human. That's what
Mhm.
it is to do this thing called
Right.
being a human, but it's not being as part of being a human and trying to go and grow in life. And so our job is to bring it back to self and understand that when we shift that inner world, everything in the outer world also will shift.
So that's as an adult.
Mm.
You talk about how deeply children need to feel belonging and how when that need goes unmet, they seek attachment, connection, belonging outside. Why is that sense of belonging within the family so foundational?
Children within their families, and especially within the parent child relationship, that is the first time they will experience relationship. And we are a social species. Everything about how we eat, sleep, and breathe from the moment that we are born drives at making sure that those connections are in place and that we have relationship as part of our human experience. When your formative experience of relationship is inside your family system, that becomes the template for how you do all other relationships for the rest of life. And because relationships are our child's heir, the human child literally will die in the absence of connection. You can water them, clothe them, shelter them, feed them, but if you do not love on them, they will die. They'll develop a condition called failure to thrive and cease to exist. That's how central and key
Mhm.
relationship is. Now, when we think about that and apply it to our understanding of how to allow children to go and grow in the best possible way, we've got to really understand that belonging is their priority. If they don't belong with you, they will find somewhere to belong. And then you'll be wondering, why is it so hard?
Mhm.
Why do I no longer matter? Why can I not have any influence over my child? Why do they not give a rat's you know what I think about their life or what I think about their choices? And many times that's because we've driven them right into the arms of their peers. And their peers now have their eyes rather than us having their eyes. Belonging is what makes a child's world go round. And so when we think about how we step into relationship with them, we want to really ensure they have that sense of belonging and that the template we are lining up for them is one that will stand them in good stead over their life course when it comes to how they in turn will do relationship with others.
That's very interesting. What do you want someone to feel when they finish watching this?
I want someone to feel hope.
Mm.
I want people to know that it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be difficult. You don't have to feel so uncertain. You don't have to feel like you don't like yourself as a parent. You don't have to have that sort of endless experience of frustration around not being able to move the needle and
Mm.
have a different experience. I would love for people to feel hope because when you can feel hope, it gives you that
Mm.
boost, even if it's just momentary, to be able to make a change, to step in to what is your truth and actually bring that to bear on the lives of your children. Wouldn't that be an extraordinary experience
It
for
sure
someone to
would.
have?